Good morning everybody from Sunrise, Leopard 50. We're over in New Zealand at the moment, and I just thought I'd make a little video and explain what has happened with the engines and the sail drives and the winches on the lifting platform and a few of those things. So I'll just wander around and hopefully put a little bit of light on the matter. So, number one, water in the engines. So we're not quite sure whether it was one of the engines or both of the engines had water in, but one engine right from the start was blowing oil somewhere around the oil cleaner. 3 or 5 different Yanmar mechanics from 3 different countries weren't able to establish where the oil was coming from, and it went on and on and on for some 12-14 months, with pools of oil underneath the engine, and the starboard engine was also leaking coolant, which dripped onto the oil sensor and then was giving us a low pressure reading, because we were getting a bad earth on the engine, on the oil sensor. So water in the engine, we're not 100% sure how it got there, but we can definitely tell you it did get there. We ended up with a water lock in Noumea at a very crucial time, coming in a reef pass, and it blew the engine fuse when we tried to wind it over for the second time, and eventually we isolated that fuse and did get the port engine going, which the starboard engine had the water lock. So we got into Noumea and got a Yanmar mechanic on board, and he wound the engine over, sort of wiggled the engine backwards and forwards, and we heard the water run down into the sump, and then we wound it over and it blew all the salt, rusty coloured water out the side. He was very surprised there wasn't vacuum siphon breakers installed in the engines. We did have a look at a lot of other production boats, and nearly all of those boats have siphon brakes, but in reading the manual, installation manual, and talking with Yanmar and Leopard, their designers take all this into account, heights, waterline heights of engines, and they're very smart people. So, and they say that I think it's 200-ish mil or 220 mil above water for the exhaust outlet. You won't have a problem. But we did video the water once we'd had the vacuum or the siphon brakes installed. There's a clear pipe, which I'll show you a video of at the moment. Going from the heat exchanger around to the mixing elbow, so you're able to see the seawater forcing up and down the pipe. When we were sailing, the little video I'll put on, we were only doing 7 knots and the sea was less than a metre, and just when we surfed down a little wave, which as you can imagine was not very much, I could see, and I videoed the water forging about a foot up the pipe. So if that siphon brake wasn't on, I imagine the water would have gone straight around to the water mixing elbow, down into the water chamber, which is supposed to be 9 litres, and that over a long period of sailing, it would seem to me that water chamber would fill up and come back up the pipe, and then could trickle down into your valves. So when it happened to us, we had sailed from Port Vila to New Caledonia. We had a beautiful sail, mostly on the beam. There was about a 3 metre sea, but it was, just nice and rolly. I think it was like 12 seconds apart. We were sailing in excess of 10 knots a lot of the time. I think we averaged 8.7 knots for 30 hours. And obviously, over that time there was a lot of water trickle, might have been just trickle, and it filled that 9 litres up and built up. And that's my theory anyway. No one, neither Yanmar or Leopard, are admitting that that's possible. As I said, we're 100% sure, well, we do know that water went in the engine, and they've pulled the engines out and they're doing tests on it, which we're probably not privileged to that information. But there was signs of rust in the engine and salt in the turbos that they pulled stuff off. The mechanics working on the boat said, it was completely obvious that salt water had been through the engine. And, as I said, the mechanic in Noumea, we all know it is a fact that salt water went in those engines. So I'll just take the camera down in the engine bay here now and just say the siphon breaks and explain how that all works now. So here's our brand new engines, and this is the heat exchanger here, and there what used to be a black pipe like this that went straight out of the heat exchanger and straight around and into the water mixing elbow there. Now we have a clear pipe which goes up, and there is a measurement. I think it's a minimum of, 450 mil above the water line. Comes up to a Vitus siphon break, and then back down and into the water mixing elbow. So the water chamber just here, 9 litres. You can imagine if the water just came around from here, which is slightly downhill to the water mixing elbow, and then down and into that chamber, it wouldn't take long to fill back up this pipe and straight back into the valves on the engine. That's my theory. No one else has given us any other explanation at all. So, it's the only thing we can think of. So one of the other thoughts was that the water wouldn't be able to come up from the sail drive through the water pump and up and around and into the heat exchanger, but the Yanmar tell us that I think it's 20 or 25 psi, the water will push over the impeller, which is a fair bit of pressure, but it also explained to us that it really would depend on the age of the impeller, where the impeller blades were situated at the, when you stop the engine, there might be just a little hole there. It could just take a perfect storm, I don't know, as our impellers were only about maybe 50 to 70 hours old, so there was nothing wrong with the impellers, but maybe the blade of the impeller was only half over the outlet, and sailing at 10 to 13 knots at times, 26 ton of boat with a bit of swell. There's also a lot of air pressure. The exhaust outlet is only about 200 millimeters above water level, so it does go up quite a height, maybe to 800 mil above the water line, before it goes back down. That a lot of times that outlet would have been completely underwater, and it might not be pushing much water back in there, but it might be a trickle. But you can imagine the air pressure of 26 ton of boat going under the water and pushing that air with maybe a little trickle of water, which would have been also adding to the 9 litre capacity in the chamber. So the Yanmar dealers like Leopard replaced the engines at this stage, as far as we know, and the sail drives. And they were told to put the engines back in exactly how they were, which is what they've done. They did reinstall the vacuum breakers that a Yanmar dealer in Noumea recommended that we put on our engines. We asked Leopard and Yanmar, would that affect our warranty at all, because there were some other suggestions that we might do so that we don't possibly get the problem again. But all of those would have affected our warranty on the engine, so we've done exactly what how they've been instructed to do them. So they've put them back in. They're guaranteed. They're brand new. You can see there the little sail drive stopcock. It is recommended on page 7 of the Yanmar sail drive manual that if you're not using your engine and you're sailing, or you're motoring on one engine, that you turn that seacock off, because you might get water in your engine. As you can imagine, that is a very difficult thing to do, to climb in here, turn that seacock off, and then remember in an absolute emergency that you got to crawl back down in here, reach around the back of that engine and turn that on again, otherwise you blow your engine, no water. One suggestion by somebody was that you put an electronic valve on there, which we weren't very keen on doing, because being electronic and you get a problem, then who knows what could happen. Plus that is an alteration to the recommended installation, so you would void your warranty. So we have opted to just take the advice of Yanmar and Leopard, and all the experts have done that. They've told us they've recalculated, looked at all the drawings and the pressures, and what they've done on the Leopard 50 is completely appropriate, and so we've gone with that, even though we have had the video and we have had water in the engine. That's quite amazing. But anyway, you don't have far to go if you change anything on these engines. You void your warranty. So hopefully by leaving the vacuum breakers on there, or siphon brake, hopefully it won't happen again, because man oh man, there's no way I want to go through this again. So one of the other things that surprisingly to us they did replace was the SD60 sail drives. When we were in Noumea, at the same time we had water in the engines, we had the low oil pressure alarm go off, which we subsequently found out that the leaking coolant on the side of the block was dripping on the oil pressure sensor, which was causing a bad earth so then it was giving a false reading. So unscrewed the sensor, cleaned up the thread, and screwed it back in, and was all good. We went to fuel up and leave, and then the water in the sail drive seal alarm went off, and we immediately thought that it was connected with, water in the engine or another false reading. We pulled the sail drive seal sensor out, which is just on the top of where it bolts down to the little platform. We pulled that out, and we put a pipe in there with a little like a plunger, and we sucked on that, and sure enough there was, I think we got about 250 mil of water out of the sail drive seal. We then got the Yanmar mechanic back on board again, and he said, now there's nothing we can do about that, because there's nowhere over here you can haul out. The boat will have to be hauled out and check the sail drive seals, which in this case they are supposed to be a removable fiberglass plate that are screwed and sikaflexed into a little recess around the sail drive. There is about a 20 mil gap all the way around the sail drive leg, and in our case the removable covers were fiberglassed in, and there was no way to get those out without taking to it with an angle grinder and a chisel and all sorts of tools. So it did allow a lot of marine growth on the sail drive leg, and once again, when the leg was pulled out, and they did have to cut a hole through the fiberglass cover to get that out, there was no real explanation of why it did get through the seals. The seals were good, but it definitely was leaking through the bottom seal and up into the seal, which stops the water getting into the engine bay. We monitored that all the way from New Caledonia to New Zealand. We pumped the water out about 3 times, and then in the end it wasn't coming into the engine bay, so we decided just to disconnect the alarm and just check it regularly to make sure we didn't have a problem. It also suggested to us that we get a very big bilge pump just in case it did start leaking in there, and anyway, that didn't happen. So yes, they pulled the sail drives out. One of the sail drives had water in the oil. It's just suggested to us that the seals may have got fishing line around them or something. That wasn't the case. The oil had been changed in Noumea, so it was only like 5 days, and somewhere along the line water got in there. When they did pull the gory folding props off, they noticed some scoring on the shaft, and a slight wobble on the shaft. So they had to order parts, and then they decided they were just going to replace both the sail drive legs and as well as the engines, and stop mucking around and trying to rebuild or sort out why the water was in, why the seals were leaking. So when they all went back in, after a number of discussions with Leopard about the removable cover that was non-removable, it was decided that we'd go with the rubber boots. I know lots of people have said they've had problems with the rubber boots. That the guy we dealt with at Whangarei Marine said he's never had one come off, so he did grind all the anti-foul off back to the gel coat, and then he prepped it and primed it and glued the rubber boots on, and put some sicka around the edge of it. He says we won't have any trouble with that, so we'll keep you posted on that. but at least now we shouldn't get half an aquarium growing in the recess above the rubber boot. What else have we got here? It was also said to us by Leopard that, you know, we're hull number 3 in the new model, so we're bound to be test pilots in a way, and you know that we are forging, you know, better sailing conditions for people that buy the later models. So, you know, once we were told that, you know, you would expect that, you know, if we've jumped in and bought one of the earlier models and we are getting some little problems, that, you know, Leopard would respond a little bit quicker than 15 months with some of these, you know, niggling problems that we've been putting up with. Again, there's absolutely no admission of any fault on Yanmar's fault or Yanmar's side or Leopard's side. They've just replaced the engines and sail drive to get us back on the water and happily sailing around. It's kind of a hard thing to believe, but then I guess it's not. But I would recommend to all other Leopard owners out there that they take careful note when sailing long times. Another suggestion to us was to start your engines every, you know, 10 hours or so, just in case there is a trickle of water in there, and it will, you know, it'll just blow it out. Seems a ridiculous thing to me. It's like $500 to get those 2 siphon brakes installed. I don't know whether it's the answer, but I've got no other recommendations. I'm, you know, certainly not super experienced in this matter, but I have seen and heard a lot over the last few months. A lot of experts, a lot of people on this boat, a lot of talk around marinas. Yeah, so I don't know. Hopefully it's done. One of the other problems we had on the boat that was, you know, tear your hair out stuff was the lifting platform. It's a fantastic thing. Simple. 2 electric winches and 6 proximity switches. You know, no hydraulics, no electrics, nothing in the water, but in those covers there, 2 electric worn winches. The water comes up through when you wind the strap up, and the water comes up on the strap and drips straight down on top of the proximity sensors. They are stainless, but they are electric, and they fail, particularly when they get salt water on them. Our lifting straps we replaced 3 times. They're just like seatbelt material, webbing, that are stitched, and you can imagine when they have a large load on them, the stitching, it's only like a thick cotton, it breaks, lets the strap stretch, that comes undone in the end. The straps are fastened onto the drums of the winches by 3 tiny little stainless screws screwed into aluminium, sort of. That stretches and tears along the webbing. So we've opted to replace that with a rope called Dynamica, which is just got a loop on one end, and then it's a flat rope. It's used on the stays on racing yachts. It's got no stretch. It's got I think the 1/2 inch one we've got's got something like 13,000 pound braking strain, and we thread it through the hole on the drum of the winch, which it's meant to be like a winch strap, and wind it up. And now we don't get any trouble with the the webbing or the stitching breaking, which just happened time and time again with us. Also, 3 times the proximity switches did stop, which causes all sorts of problems when you're out in the middle of nowhere, and you can't get the platform to move up or down. I strongly recommend to learn how to do that manually. There is a way of hot wiring on the solenoid where you can get it up and down a little bit of the time, but I'll just show you. So one of the problems here is this red handle, and it has play back and forwards about 7 or 8 mil. The proximity switch that's in there that lets you know the handle's up only has a variance of about 1 or 2 millimeters, so it's very close to that handle arm, and when you move it up and down, guess what happens? With a little bit of wiggle, you knock the corner off the proximity switch, the salt water gets in and it's gone. No good. The other thing that happens is that there's one proximity switch just in there, there's another one just in there, and that is a sealed cover plate all the way along the back of that boat, and there's absolutely no way of getting at that mechanism in there or at those 2 proximity switches. So I've got a hole saw and drilled 200 mil inspections in there where I can get at those switches, because the other proximity switch that's down in that part also operates on the bolt that locks the platform in place. It had the top of it knocked off and failed. Set an alarm off in the marina whilst we were away for half a day. Everyone in the marina thought our boat was sinking. There's a horrendous alarm going off. The other thing that happened is that you can see on the other side of the lifting arm there's a threaded bolt comes up with a plunger. That plunger hits the top of the nut when the platform comes up to the full height. It's got a proximity switcher in the center of it, which is spring loaded, and it tells it it's at the correct height and stops it. Well, guess what happens? The plunger has a little circlip in there with a stainless steel washer, stainless steel spring, and the circlip holds the spring in position. It'd be really handy if the circlip wasn't steel, because it does get in the water. So in our case, the little circlip just rusted away, jammed on the end of the proximity sensor, was telling the brain that the platform was fully up all the time because the sensor was hanging down. So again, the problem. So we've pulled that apart, replaced the 2 circlips with stainless steel, and no further problem. But I can tell you, you really do need to learn about this platform. It is a very, very simple thing, and it's very good, but you need to know what the little lights on the circuit board of the lifting platform. There's all sorts of numbers and lights that come on there, so have a look in your manual, run it up and down, make sure you understand which light is telling you what, because if you do get a problem, you can read those lights and it'll basically tell you which sensor is the problem. Also, get yourself some spare proximity sensors, and in our case, what we've done, we've bought proximity switches that have a range of 8 millimeters, so we're now able to keep the sensor 5 or 6 millimeters away from that red lever locking bar, so we shouldn't have any more problem. Also regularly spray those sensors with some lanolin anti-corrosion type stuff. They have got a little O-ring seal in them, but they do corrode. It was suggested to me that, you know, we put some heat shrink or something around that may keep them lasting a bit longer. The other thing that we replaced on this lifting platform was the folding chocks. 3 times they just failed. They snap. They're a very good idea. They fold down nice and flat. But when you're sailing, the boat just rocks backwards and forwards, and they just, you know, they're just alloy, and they're tiny little 5mm braces on them, and they just snap and fold over. We've put these on now. They are removable. That white part slides out, and they're very roughy, tufty. So keep an eye on those, because once they fail, those alloy ones they put on, it's very hard to get your boat on. Okay, well, I hope all that helps. Leopard have been very proactive with us since the video went out, and you know, they're trying to get everything sorted. They have covered a lot of our downtime, haul outs and marina fees, and, you know, tests and examinations and blah blah blah. But, you know, at the end of the day, we've probably lost somewhere around 6 months of our sailing experience. Someone the other day said to us that we might have only been sailing for 18 months, but we've had 10 years experience of things going wrong, and I think that's pretty right. But hopefully now we're out and away, and we can put lots and lots and lots and lots of unreal experiences and sailing this beautiful, beautiful boat, because it is a beautiful boat. We're very, very happy with the boat. I think, you know, part of the problem with this boat, early model, we believe it got rushed to Australia to make the Century Cove and the Sydney boat shows, and, you know, maybe some quality stuff wasn't checked properly, and you know, handover might have been a bit quick. I don't know, that's my opinion. You would think with all that knowledge of, you know, an early model and rushing a boat to boat shows, that Leopard would have been more responsive. I hope Leopard have learnt. I really love them to change some of their ways. And, you know, we've been making some suggestions, not that we're anybody special, but, you know, I'd love to continue to talk to the Leopard officials and, you know, just share our experiences as a customer with the Leopard company owners, to ensure everybody gets, you know, a really good experience on the water, which, you know, I'm sure they don't want any of this to happen either. So thank you, Leopard. Thank you, Yanmar. Thank you, Power Equipment in New Zealand. You guys were awesome. And thanks to Keith and Renee of Zatara. They got it out there and made this, you know, helped us get a voice in this whole situation. Thank you to all the people in the Leopard Owners Group and the Leopard 50 Owners Group. I mean, together we all made a difference. So, you know, don't be shy to speak out and act as a group, because people power does work, and, you know, people can change things. It's quite amazing. Margie and I are absolutely blown away by this whole experience. Anyway, that's all I've got to say at the moment. So see you on the water, and let's all have a great time sailing. Bye for now.